welcome to the Razor's Edge.
All right.
So life's been fairly crap for a good year now. So how are you guys holding up?
Well, I mean, me personally, I've just been, well, look, it's difficult. It's difficult for everybody. It's varying degrees of difficult. I think different people, of course, have a different experience of what this is. For me, as somebody who, lived and worked as a touring musician, it's a complete and unmitigated disaster, really, on pretty much every level. So I can't pretend, I'm not going to try and, skirt around the reality of it. I mean, I refused to release the Dread Sovereign album last year, really. I didn't see any point. I thought, well, fuck that year. And now it pretty much looks like this year is going to be more of the same. So, I mean, it is a disaster for touring musicians. And I think also people are beginning to realize and have started to realize that even just as fans, this is a potentially disastrous period in time for live music, for culture, for counterculture, for art, for expression, all of these things. This is potentially very, very serious. So, yeah, it's all pretty fucked, isn't it?
It is, and it must impact you as well, because you obviously are a booking agent as well as being in a number of bands.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's no one really knows when, where, what, how, if anything can come back. There doesn't seem to be any roadmap. Most countries in Europe are moving at slightly different paces, fumbling in the dark for whatever way to react to things. We don't play very much in Ireland, and I'm not really that interested in it, really. But I wouldn't imagine anybody will stand on a stage here for a long, long time. And the reality is that for what we knew, which was rock and roll, I guess, it doesn't come back to where it was until we get to zero.
Yeah.
And that's what people have to realize, is that, in their head, maybe, I suppose, I'm a skeptic, I'm a pessimist. I'm not known for my, blue sky thinking. But I don't think people quite realize just yet that unless it goes back to zero, you don't get gigs like you used to. And also a distanced gig with, let's say, 10-20% capacity is no use for a touring band, a band that needs flights, a band that has to travel. So the reality is you might just get to see a small band in your local area in front of local people. So you won't see Primordial. You might possibly see Dread Sovereign. Possibly. But again, we have to fly, and if they don't remove the rules on people quarantining when they return, or as is now starting to happen, you cannot fly without vaccination. Again, there's many, many hurdles for society to jump over before musicians, who I think are going to be the last allowed out. Well, if they are allowed out, for this to change,
Yeah, absolutely. I've been saying for a while to people who think that they're going to get gigs in the next few months that you're not going to get a crowd until everyone in that crowd is vaccinated.
I don't think. I mean, I listen. Last May I said to people, "This is going to happen. Where we are going to be where we are now." So I've been the harbinger of doom for 6, 7, 8 months. But it's within 1 month. You can listen to my podcast. I've now got 40 episodes, and you can hear me talk on episode 1 about biometric health passports linked to travel.
Yeah.
These are things I've been thinking about for a long, long time, and the signs were all there. There were pandemic stress tests run by all of these major technocratic institutions over the last couple of years. The warning signs were there that this was on its way. So, and people went, "Oh, come on, we'll be back out in the summer," and it's not a chance,
Yeah.
not a chance. And then once the train has left the station and is hurtling in one, well, not one direction, but without the brakes being pulled, you have basically a botched response by a broken system run by cowards. Is basically what's happening
Mm.
on some level. I do think there's fear. There's people trying to do their best amongst that. There's the perennial worry about the overwhelming of health services, etc., which we hear every winter. But yeah, it's a disaster for culture, for art, for freedom of expression, for mental health, for, look, for hundreds of things. I could give you list off 100 reasons, but these are things I've been thinking about for a long time. But gigs this year, forget about it. This summer, not a chance. I think there's a 1%, 2% chance of gigs happening this summer. Maybe by October, you might be up to about a 10% chance.
Yeah.
And that's the truth of it. Unless the public mood changes and people begin to push back against things, I don't think, I think the public mood, because so much of what is happening is short-termism, public mood affects a lot, and people are still scared. So I don't know. I mean, this is not probably the interview you wanted, but it is what it is.
That, well, it was. We've expanded on some questions I had, so it is sort of the interview I wanted. But and we'll get on to Dread Sovereign in a minute. I've got one last question on sort of this subject. Is that I was looking around yesterday, and there's one fairly major band who had a tour planned for February who are still selling tickets for that tour. So what's your opinion on bands, promoters, venues who are doing that sort of thing?
Yeah, it seems somewhat dishonest, but at the same time, I do understand that the whole live music industry is a sort of deck of cards that is precariously balanced. That once the carnage of this summer begins and most of the summer festivals gets cancelled, what you're also dealing with there is hundreds of thousands of euro or millions of euro flights that have been hanging in the air, moved from last summer, that are all going to get cancelled or not be taken. Who pays for them? Booking agents are going to go to the wall, venues, local promoters, festivals are going to disappear, bands are going to disappear also. Don't forget, bands who need to tour to have an economy to live are going to disappear. I think this next 12 months are going to be really revealing. So I understand the idea that, look, just hold on to your tickets, and it's going to be cancelled, but it's going to be rescheduled for next March, next June, next September 2022, which is kind of just like sort of keeping the money in the bank, so to speak. Because if everyone asks for their tickets money to be returned for everything that they have hanging in the balance, there isn't really, I imagine there isn't really the money for that, and many things will collapse. So it's a very strange, precarious moment. I don't think bands should still be selling tickets for a tour in February, personally. I mean, look, that's a month away. Well, that's actually 10 days away. It's not gonna.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen. It's impossible. But I think that slowly we're going to get March, April, May. They're all going to slowly disappear. So,
well, Glastonbury's been just an hour ago, hasn't it? Have announced they're cancelled, haven't they? So, and that's June.
Yeah, and most of being a booking agent, I'm privy to some of the insider stuff, and it's clear that most of the heavy metal festivals in Europe in the summer are now beginning to try and move to 2022. And again, all these things depend on, I mean, just some very rational thinking, which is, with all the best will in the world, can you see of the authorities allowing 40,000 people to descend on a field in Germany, flying in from all over the world to rub off each other and breathe on each other and exist cohabit the same space before some level of, I don't know, immunity is reached or vaccination percentage. Look, that's not going to happen before this September. And I think people know that.
Yeah.
And of course, then, but that's before we even get into all of the discussions about whether it's going to be allowed anyway. And that's a rather dystopian Orwellian discussion. But I'm an open skeptic and I'm a pessimist. And I do think there are two narratives happening at the moment. One is a health crisis, and the other is a crisis of civil liberty. Civil liberty has been suspended, and democracy has been paused, and they don't come back easily. If anyone could point to me any moment in history where any nation, city, state handed over all of its rights to positions of power and authority and institutions of the state and got them back, I'd like to know that example, because it doesn't work like that. That's not what happens. Power begets power, and these things there's going to have to be a huge push to be allowed to go back to even 75% of where we were, because that's the nature of power. And I think that anybody who's not understanding that this is also a crisis of civil liberty and democracy and sovereignty is not only naive and willfully ignorant, but maybe, I mean, I get it. It's very dark stuff to think about, and nobody really wants to think about that. And look, at the end of the day, I'll say this to you, man. If I'm wrong about my view of where society could be headed, then all I get to be is wrong, and people can fucking say, "Hey, you went a bit feral there. You lost your mind," which is true, which is absolutely true. Who wouldn't have lost a bit of their mind being in isolation for a year? And I can go, okay, and you can hand me a beer at a festival and go, see, you were too wrong, and that's all I have to live with. If, on the other hand, I might be right to a percentage, then this affects every single aspect of everybody's lives. And yeah, it's a Orwellian. I mean, I know that's an overused phrase, but it's a dystopian nightmare, which is straight out of a Black Mirror episode, where a huge technocratic surveillance state has its fingers in every single part of your life, or so to speak, including your brain. So I don't know what to tell you. We have to put pressure on our local. We still live theoretically in a democracy. People have to put pressure on their local elected representatives to not allow the arts to die, because it's clear that they don't give a shit about. A month before all this happened, we were constantly told about our mental health and this, that, and the other. And this happened, not a shit given about art, freedom of expression, freedom of speech also, but any therapeutic senses of the arts. Everybody was just told, just do it online and shut the fuck up. So, yeah, serious stuff, man. It feels weird talking about music at the moment, because I'm not really a musician. I'm a statistician.
Okay.
Because all you're doing is watching numbers move up and down on screens. I have no idea. Like, it's all the things that we knew that you did in the past, which were, you arranged gigs, you had release shows, there was movement and agency and purpose around releasing a record, especially a record like Dread Sovereign, which is designed to be played live. Yeah. Then, that's reduced to zero. So all you're doing is looking at numbers. Oh, I see we've hit 12,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. I mean, that's quite gratifying in a way, as a person who is autistically obsessed by numbers, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. I don't mean I'm autistic. I mean that I have a sort of obsession with numbers and statistics. But it's not what we started playing in bands for.
No, absolutely. So I did want to talk about Dread Sovereign during the interview. So
sure, okay. Sorry, man, go for it.
It's fine. It's been great so far. That's fine. So people probably know you better as the frontman in Primordial, but and Primordial and Dread Sovereign are very different. Bands and entities. So what was the spawning point of Dread Sovereign away from what you're doing in Primordial?
Sure. Well, I guess it was after Redemption at the Puritan's Hand. Primordial had gone through the touring cycle, festivals, and there was a kind of a down period of a year or two. And there'd been a band called Plagued and a band called Funeral Pyre. They weren't really bands. They were just, I recorded one loose demo here and there. I'd always been making riffs on my own, sort of writing bad, crappy songs and not really taking it seriously. And then when that break happened in 2011, I decided, right, I'm going to do this properly. And so we found Bones on the guitar. Originally, it was Simon, the drummer, Primordial, was in the band. But he couldn't really, wasn't really into the touring in the back of the van thing with his work and stuff. So we got Johnny, who now plays in Conan. And the big difference is really that I'm writing maybe 2/3 of the music, and I don't do that in Primordial. I'm just a singer in Primordial.
Yeah.
We structure everything together, but I don't write the riffs, whereas Dread Sovereign, I'm writing the music, playing the bass and singing. And the idea of Dread Sovereign was that I couldn't care less about it, whether it was original or not. I had our band all ready to do that. So Dread Sovereign was part Venom, part Motorhead, Tank, New Wave British Heavy Metal, part Hellhammer, St. Vitus, Hawkwind, all that kind of old school 1977 to 1982 sort of feeling. That's what I wanted it to be. And then it just sort of took on a life of its own, and sort of developed into this thing. Even listening to the new record, even though some of its parts are not particularly original, it still doesn't really sound like anything around at the moment. So yeah, and then we did some van tours, played a few small festivals, and the energy between the three of us is just really good, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Back to the days of actually rehearsing. Well, it was by rehearsing every week, having a few beers, having a laugh, getting in the back of a van, playing to 50 people in a small bar, selling your merch afterwards, hanging out with people. And that's who I am. I've made maybe 20 albums. I don't sit still. I'm not I have no interest in pausing for reflection. I need something to do every 3 months. So I'm bloody minded, relentless in my pursuit of having to have another attainable goal several times a year. Has to happen, or I lose my fucking mind. So that's who I am. And that's why Dread Sovereign sounds like it does, still is around. So it's the sort of playground for me to be a bit reckless and devil may care.
Okay, that's fair enough. So I'm just taking a quote from the press release, which says, "Our motto when we started was the world is doomed, and it seems life is imitating art." So obviously you were writing the album before the pandemic struck. But what was inspiring you at that time to write like this?
I mean, look, there's never. Alan Averill isn't going to make a happy-go-lucky power metal record. That's just not in my makeup. I'm a miserablist, I'm a cut from the classic cloth of Irish. How can we say doom and gloom? There aren't many happy heavy metal bands from here. We just don't do that very well. They're always usually wind-sodden and drenched in fucking whiskey and bitterness. So we're no different than that, But it's doom metal. In the beginning, it was much bit more obscure, slow, grinding, swampy doom. Not swampy, that's the wrong idea. Obscure sort of doom metal, and then we just ratcheted the tempo up a bit to, as I said, involve some more Tank, Motorhead, New Wave British Heavy Metal influences, and world is doom thing is just a tagline. It's just something I stuck on a t-shirt once. And I wouldn't read too much into it. Like I said, if Primordial is my life's work and is weighed down with a seriousness of history and cultural weight, Dread Sovereign is where I get to be a bit more reckless and a bit more rock and roll. Which is the other side of my personality. Okay,
that's cool. So obviously the new album's released mid-pandemic, and you mentioned earlier you delayed the release anyway, but wanting to touch on the subject again, but how much of an impact did the pandemic have on at least the recording process of the album? Were you all done by then?
We were done by November 2019, and then there was no gap in the release schedule for Metal Blade. And then when all this started, I said, nah, fuck this here, forget it, because the whole year was going to be a write-off. I knew it, like I said, within weeks. And I thought to myself, I don't want this album to just get lost. And then if somebody goes, oh, you need to make a new album now to go on tour in 2022, So the whole album just gets lost in the ether of statistics. I didn't want that, so I thought to myself, okay, what could possibly be the midway point of this? I knew nothing was going to come back, I think, before summer. So Metal Blade just said, look, we can't just hold on to this record indefinitely. It has to come out. So, all right, January 2021, let's see. And maybe we can get to play by September, October 2021. That was the intention. And already people are saying to me, hey, you better start working on the next one. And it's like, well, you can't, because, again, we can't meet to rehearse. So having expended so much energy on making the record to actually have no reward for it, and then start into another one. But people are saying, oh, can you not trade files? And no, I refuse to make heavy metal by trading files and being a square on a screen. I won't be taking part in any of those cooperation, singing in your room videos. I won't be trading files. I'd rather shelve everything than even give in an inch to any of that stuff. We're being corralled into an era of anti-humanism, and so to submit to that, to me, is wrong. I honestly, I mean, if Dread Sovereign doesn't get to play live or else, there's no band anymore. That's it. And probably the same for Primordial. We might make one more record, but otherwise, there's no agency. There's no purpose to it. In fact, I think there's very little purpose to heavy metal. If you're the kind of heavy metal band musician who thinks that all of this is okay, you're probably, I guess, a gamer who sits in front of the screen 16 hours a day anyway, and is okay at making guitar run through videos. But we aren't all like that. And so if that's the potentiality or the potential future, this remote living concept, then I mean, I'll just become a serial killer or a politician, I suppose.
You mentioned briefly those collaboration videos that we've seen since the pandemic started, and how you wouldn't take part in them. No. Have you actually been approached to be in any of them?
No. I get asked every month. People ask me to sing in new bands. Every month, to sing on things, to guest on this, and I have to be very careful because I don't want to be this voice that just seems to appear everywhere because everybody's making, like, people have said, oh, this is a great time to be creative, and I think to myself, is it really, or is it just a great time for us to be drowned in more records we don't need, i.e. every musician is now going to make an acoustic record, a neo-folk record. Here's my, blues Americana record. Nobody needs 5 records from me next year just because I'm bored and sitting at home. And also the inspiration from any of the things that you write are based on life experience. And right now there is no life experience other than, well, okay, so if I want to maybe make a one-man bedroom black metal funeral doom record about isolation, then maybe I have the inspiration. But for most things, no. I think that I'll find the I'll find the grim lining to any silver cloud anybody tries to explain to me. But I don't really buy that. No, I mean, look, I do think that, for example, the Slay at Home series that they do in the States is done really well. With all the what you call them 2 minutes to midnight people doing all the kind of, they're very professional. I do watch them and it's kind of cool, but at the same time it sort of breaks my heart a bit to watch all these musicians try and still be musicians, but they're just sitting at home. And I appreciate the effort and what they're trying to do to remain in contact and human with people, but I have a feeling it would either depress me or make me too angry to take part somehow. So thankfully I don't get asked to do those, but I do get asked to sing on, and I could right now be making I could right now be trying to write vocals for a black metal record, a thrash metal record, a death metal record. I mean, I get asked every 2 or 3 weeks to sing on something, so I don't know is the answer.
Fair enough. So you managed to spin a lot of plates when we're not locked down. Obviously, you're in numerous bands, you're booking agent, etc., etc. So how do you manage to juggle all your time amongst all of these projects and work activities?
Not to mention I had a covers band before. There's Twilight of the Gods, Before that, I do a podcast, which is now on episode 40. I write for a couple of magazines. I've just always been like this. I've no interest in being a home bird. I'm not interested in, like I said, a moment to pause for reflection. I'm kind of relentless about always having to move forward and be busy on something. I'm not interested in quiet time. So while I have to, because I'm really obsessed with mortality, about the short spin around the ball of dirt we have, and so to do as much as possible, to take in as much as possible, I suppose the Epicurean way of life is what appeals to me, and that includes just trying to see as much of life as you can and experience as much of it as you can while you have the health and the energy and the sanity and the passion and the dedication. So, on those terms, then that's what I have to do. I mean, it's been in my head that, hey, you should, there's always something around in my head like, hey, you should write a book. Hey, you should get together all your old fanzines, make a compendium. You need to do this, you need to do that. And I mean, I only do about half of the things that are in my head to do. Maybe less even. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the kind of person I would spend half of the year on tour if I could,
Yeah.
easily. I mean, before this, I would get bored being, not bored. Boredom sets into the boring mind. Not bored, but I would get frustrated at being at home for 3 weeks. So being stuck inside for a year is like some kind of torture.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned your podcast a couple of times, and obviously period has given you some time to focus on that.
Yeah.
What was the driving force to start that podcast? Because I know you were considering it prior to the pandemic anyway. So what was the driving force behind it?
Well, it was something I wanted to do 3 or 4 years ago. I recorded a few test ones. The idea was was at a festival we were at to just grab somebody from a band I knew or somebody who might be interesting to talk to, take snatches of interesting conversations, not crap about, tell me about your drum sound or blah, 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 like interesting conversations. The idea was to do it like that. And I never quite got round to it. And then within a week of this happening, I was going, okay, I need to do this. This needs to happen now. And so I had to figure out exactly, the platforms, how to do it, the structure, the editing, the recording, all this kind of stuff. And it's been a learning curve, but it's been one of the positives that's come out of this that I'll continue to do anyway, if and when this possibly all changes. I would still do it. I mean, it's getting a lot of listens. I mean, comparatively, it's getting hundreds of listens every day, which racking up to quite, I guess is over 100,000 on all the platforms so far, which I think is kind of positive, considering originally it got no press from the heavy metal media. It's only really now that because I have Dread Sovereign album that I can talk about it to people. Really strangely, none of the magazines really wanted to write about it. I guess people were in furlough. I got constantly, hey, can you just make a video of your top 5 vintage t-shirts? Nobody wanted to ask me about what are musicians doing in lockdown. They want content. Everybody just wants visual content to spike their numbers. So, I just sort of worked away on my own terms. And, it's clear to me that, for example, on YouTube, podcast listens on YouTube are not going to go through the roof. You need visuals. But I don't want to be a YouTuber. Again, that's the thing, is that musicians now being corralled into being content creators. The thing about the podcast for me is that I've always had a lot to say and liked debating and arguing. And that, so it suits me, the model of the podcast. It suits my rambling kind of style and my views on the world and my interests and things. And so I think people subscribe to the podcast because they like the kind of all over the place nature of it. And it's been a mechanism for coping for me. It's a focus every week. I do it, and the ones I do deep dives into about historical research mean I do some study. So without it, I think I'd be even more unmoored, like in even deeper waters. And thankfully, it seems to resonate with people. I get a lot of messages from people thanking me for talking about mental health, about depression, about I do some stuff about trying to keep fit because I'm really into sports and stuff as well, and keeping fit and running, and amidst, of course, the gloom and and some elements of politics. People like the fact that I'm sort of not afraid to, well, within reason to talk about to be an open skeptic in the world and ask questions and that kind of thing. So it's an important part of every week for me, because obviously all the rest of your jobs, work, agency, movement have all been taken away. So I had to do something. It was either that, I think, or go even more insane.
Yeah, and the subjects of your podcast jump around from like the political themes, the historical things, the mental health issues, the tour stories, etc., etc.
Yeah,
Do you ever go into the podcast thinking, I want to get a certain message out to my listeners here?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I mean, I don't want to lecture. I don't want to proselytize too much. It's not really a platform for my for my politics or something, but I do want to address that sometimes. I mean, I suppose ultimately I want people, I want to present a podcast that has elements of all the things you mentioned, including a little bit of wit, gallows humor. There's impressions, there's tour stories. I don't, to not take myself that seriously, but when I need to make a point to try and make it with like to make it in a very succinct or straightforward way, as I think one of the main themes I constantly return to is the intense polarization that exists in society today, and to try and hold the middle ground, hold the line for rationality, reason, empiricism, debate, and therefore try and consider both positions within the argument, but also try and make a stand against some of the terrible authoritarian impulses of cancel culture, of trying to silence people. That's very much of the sort of backbone of what I'm talking about. I'm a free speech absolutist, so I think that I think it's really, really potentially disastrous the way a lot of people today don't seem to really consider freedom of speech as something that's important in modern society. So I try and hold the line against all that kind of stuff, but yet also try and understand some of the impulses, and also try and maybe ask questions from different angles maybe people haven't thought about, and also not to try and make people think and consider. I mean, it's maybe just the way my mind works, but as soon as this happened, my first thought was, digital passports. This is the structure of an increased surveillance state, which is going to be linked to our travel and conformity to this, to a micromanaged. That was my first thought. Was right to that, and whereas now, 12 months later into this, I'm not trying to be odd or anything, but it feels like, some people are now beginning to think of that. I'm not really a people person, so my mind works in a slightly, maybe a different way that other people find either annoying, irritating, challenging. But also, there's a lot of people who do think about things like me, and I think they don't have. I don't see a lot of the questions I'm asking being answered. The things, and also an awful lot of heavy metal podcastism is done by Americans. I think a lot of people like that they can hear a European voice, and a lot of it is very nerdy, and I mean that in the nice way. I'm a nerd too, but it's all about particular albums from the year 1987. It's very rare that you're going to, I think, hear somebody speak out about political or cultural or social issues, and so that was important for me to try and have a kind of off-kilter look at some things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think a lot of artists try and steer their conversation away from political themes for fear of upsetting some of their fan base.
Yeah, Well, I mean, I'm perfectly aware that I've done that over the years. I mean, it's too late for me now to not do that. But I do try, like, I've got done 40 episodes now, and I do try very hard to hold the line. Like, I don't make, I've always thought generally very hard about what I say. And so I try not to make blanket statements or make generalizations or like, I don't try to go out to offend somebody. So, like, let's say, for example, I will say on the podcast, I did one which was say briefly about American politics. I don't dwell on it long, but just to say to people that, hey, impeachment isn't a new thing. It's happened to other presidents, and other presidents have been, someone shot at Reagan, somebody impeached Clinton, all of these things. Nixon was impeached. Just to try and put some I've always been very interested in history. Just to try and put some historical context on things, because everything now is so instant and short term. I think an awful lot of people forget there are historical reference points, and we always think of our own time of living as the most fantastical or the darkest or whatever. So I try and put a bit of context on some things like that without making big references to Trump or to any of the stuff. I mean, I'll say, look, I think he's a fool and a blackguard and a whatever, but I don't go too into all of that stuff. I will just try and, for some people who maybe didn't realize, like, and they go, oh yeah, Clinton was impeached, for example. Yeah. Just off the top of my head, because I think people forget the historical reference points. And so, and then again, you might tune in the next weekend and it's just a story about me wandering around New York taking cocaine. I mean, it's completely random. There's ones where, there's travel ones, so I think I like the fact that it's completely impulsive and all over the place.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Absolutely, and I think it probably more compelling listening from being like that rather than the normal structured.
Yeah, I mean, I do notice within the podcast world, some of the most successful podcasts are really, really, really niche stuff, like true crime and forensic psychology and stuff like that, which are massively in depth. Now, I'm not going to do that. So I think if people listen to my podcast, it's because it's the opposite, in the sense that, okay, it can be research and stuff, but sometimes it's just clear that I'm rambling, telling a story about, for example, in the last podcast, meeting journey or something.
Yeah.
And people, and some of it is funny, which I don't think people expected, but, anyway.
Okay,
you've got to laugh at this tragicomic situation we're in,
absolutely. So to round off the interview and to look forward to the future.
Oh yeah.
What are your and your band's plans for the next 12 months, things permitting?
Well, I mean, Primordial started rehearsing new songs and then we had to stop because we can't meet. So there is plans for album number 10 of Primordial. This year is the 30th anniversary of the band. But also, if things continue like this, then nothing will happen.
Yeah.
There won't be any rehearsals or any new album, or I imagine slowly but surely all the shows will be cancelled. Because there's about 30 or 40 this year. I think they'll all go eventually. So I don't know. There will be another Primordial album, of course, but it hangs in the balance as to when and where and how. Dread Sovereign, I mean, right now I'm doing this, talking to you. There's press. There's, numbers are moving. It's big. The band is taking a big step up from where we were. A lot of people love the record, which is great. There is a tour plan for October, September, and so all we can do is just keep trying to poke the bear, let people know we're still here over the summer. That's the problem, is that so many musicians are out there just trying to do something to stay relevant in terms of content. And so we're no different. Already we're today talking about, hey, I don't know, do we record an EP of obscure covers or something to try and keep some sort of movement or attention. But I mean, every band is trying to do the same. So I don't know what any of us can plan. I mean, the reality is that our culture, our subculture, is an old-fashioned. It's traditional in the sense that hard rock and heavy metal relies on playing live. That's the artery. That's through which the blood of the scene moves. So in lockdown, it doesn't exist. It only exists in terms of things like this.
Yeah.
So realistically, our subculture, whatever you want to call it, can't exist in lockdown. So while society persists in doing that, we don't really have a place within it, as I see. So all of it depends on society moving back to opening up, to restoring civil liberties, restoring individual sovereignty and freedoms, you know, and of course, managing to get a handle on a health crisis. So they're big asks, and certainly the welfare of musicians and the people who love and respect and make and create and imbibe art are the last thing that anybody is concerned about right now.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, man. You know, having said that, I will say I'm not without hope. I'm not a complete and utter pessimist, and I think that people out there really just. I've been trying to say to myself, you got to stay sane, stay fit, stay in the game, because you know if I've been saying this in the podcast, if people fall off the ledge and fall off the edge and try and find solace in all the things that destroy them, it won't do them any good. And I think maybe to consider the original reasons why heavy metal resonated with them, which was about self-overcoming, maybe being the outsider, and it giving you power and strength and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of the very simple, I suppose, self-help kind of thing I've been saying to people is like, if this all defeats us and gets the better of us, it won't do us any good in the long run, and they win. Yeah. That's kind of how I look at it.
Well, thanks for spending so much time talking to us this afternoon.
It's all right, man.